Ironhawk Technologies, delivering decision-critical data.
Hello, and welcome to this walkthrough of the powerful features of SmartSync. There are a couple of different modes in which SmartSync is typically used. SmartSync can be installed in a very lightweight environment, on platforms like Android or Windows Phone, iPad, and so on, with a very small footprint. Today, however, we'll be looking at the peer-to-peer sharing capabilities, which happens at the enterprise server level or the station level. After all, speed is everything when it comes to getting decision-critical data. Now, we're going to demonstrate the unique power of SmartSync using Microsoft SharePoint. We will download files from SharePoint using both self-compression and Delta encoder. Entering via a cellular connection in California, moving through a VPN gateway in Arizona, through the Lockheed Martin corporate intranet in Norfolk, Virginia, and then down to the Lockheed Martin SharePoint Server 2010 in Orlando, Florida. And the files will be getting called upon using a client which is running the SmartSync DCS platform and a plugin to Windows Internet Explorer 8. And we've made no modifications to SharePoint in the process. We'll simply be setting up a proxy so that the files can transit from the original to the destination in this direction here. So what you can see on my screen are a number of panels we've pre-opened. The first thing we'll do is run a ping test just to show you what kind of activity we have. So it's a fairly fast connection at an average of 50 millisecond latency, and we have good quality servers so we don't have any interrupts. Although SmartSync is designed to resume at the point of interrupt so that no thrashing of the transit of the files occur. The next thing I'll show you is SmartSync in terms of how large it is. This is the instance we're going to be using, and I'll show you the properties file. And you can see that the SmartSync instance runs about 12 megabytes. And this, of course, will fill up with content in the content store as time goes on. So this file will grow proportionally to the amount of content, but those are configurable to within limits, or we can purge it based on time. Within the file structure of SmartSync, we're using a proxy mechanism, but there are other mechanisms that are usable by SmartSync. You can set it up as a peer-to-peer file sharing process where SmartSync handles the transport in between, and you can also set it up as a basic plugin. So this is the proxy approach, and you can also set it up as a plugin. These all run in the background, and there is no human action necessary to invoke SmartSync. During this demo, we will be taking overt actions just to show you the various steps that are involved, but as a normal process, you would not need to do anything but start up the service and let it run. So within our forward proxy folders, there's a forward proxy store, that's the content store, where the content will be downloaded and locally staged to make it usable as both an accelerated browsing session as well as having the production and the amount of data communication between the server and the client storing the content locally. And you can see that the content store is currently empty. So the second thing we need to do is bring up the SharePoint site that we're going to be operating. You can see that we're using Windows Internet Explorer version 8, and I'll navigate over to the location of our SharePoint site. And I'll browse down into our test directory. We have a number of standard Microsoft SharePoint compatible files. These are very large files, and you'll see their size as we bring them down. And then we have some image files, and we also have an AVI file we'll bring down. So we're going to adjust the size of this window so you can see both things at the same time. And in order to invoke the proxy, we need to now direct our LAN connection to a local host. So we'll set our proxy settings to the local host. And here we have localhost part 8080, where the browser will now start looking at the local host as the mechanism for receiving this content. In order to apply those things, we need to hit OK and then close the browser. Again, this is purely for the purpose of the demo, but I wanted to make sure that you saw we are changing the way the browser communicates. So now we're going over to this window and we're going to start up SmartSync. Again, it's a background action when it's normally deployed, but in this case we're going to invoke the forward proxy bat file. And then you'll begin to see the components of SmartSync rapidly start up, and then they will become a background service. And it should be pointed out that when you install SmartSync, the entirety of the SmartSync application is installed pretty much as a file directory. There are no registry additions that are made, and there's nothing that embeds itself inside the operating system. So it can be very easily updated by simply doing a file replacement, directory replacement, or folder replacement in order to replace files should there be a need for maintenance of the application. So now you can see that SmartSync is up and running, and as I begin the process of restarting the browser will start passing traffic through SmartSync, but the destination that is trying to resolve its content does not have a SmartSync server sitting in front of it. So all that traffic has passed through and we receive a bunch of null values. which simply says, hey, I don't have a SmartSync server to talk to, so I'm just going to pass that through and let it appear in a browser window. Now I'll navigate back to the SharePoint location. And now we'll begin to see the messages that are showing a read value. And this indicated that SmartSync has captured content. And down here, just above my cursor, is the 77% savings using self-compression, where the content that was sent to produce this web page was compressed in the process between the server and the client. And we can check that by looking at the content store. Inside the content store, we should have a file that in fact, here it is, showing that the first amount of content has been locally deposited, and that will be used not only for the purpose of delta encoding, but providing a more rapid session interaction between the client and the server. So if this was running on a very challenged network, the interaction between the client and the server would look as if it were running in a much more high-speed environment. So now I'll browse down into the folder structure, and these are the files you saw before. And again, we have results over here of 79% self-compression, and we can see that another amount of content has been deposited in the contents folder. Now in this version of the demo, we're using a file naming convention as the way to invoke the delta encoding. You'll notice that I have file names that look very similar for these three files, and these three files are different sizes and different content. In this case, the base file will be named without any extension, and I'll revise the names of the other two files as time goes on. So the first thing we want to do is actually download this file, and I'm going to take the overt action to ask for a copy of it. I could also select the hyperlink and the process would work identically. However, for the purposes of this demo, you can see all the steps as they proceed. So I'm going to ask for a downloaded copy, and normally at this point, SharePoint would be asking you where the destination is. In this case, SmartSync interrupts the process and passes the file between the server and the client, and now we have the opportunity to ask where we want the file to be placed. So I'm going to ask for the file to be saved, but before we do that, I'm going to show that this was sent with an 88% compression between the server and the client, and that was a self-compression as you can see here. This unique power of SmartSync goes a long way in delivering critical data when it is most needed.
That's so dumb.
So we'll save the file, we'll save it to a location, and here are our locations, and I've created a folder that shows at the bottom here, testing for April 1st, 2014, and we'll put it in the down box. And I'm just going to rename the file so that we don't have any confusion afterwards, and we'll call this original. Okay, so the first thing I'll show you is, back to the proxy store, here's a 17 megabyte entry which represents the file that we've just downloaded. And in the testing folder, you can see that on April 1st, if I go to the down box, here in fact is a 17 megabyte file, which represents the name that we just used, which is -original. And if I open up this file, you will see that it's a very large file containing many hundreds of slides that are very graphically rich. And we'll be making an update to that same file, except in this case it will be coming now as a 21 megabyte file. So we'll add about 4 megabytes in total of content. So back to our SharePoint setting, I'm now going to change the name just so I don't create any issues. And even during this process of using a name change, you can see that SmartSync continues to provide benefits in the form of self-compression. And I'll just add a modifier to the name, we'll call this revision 1, and we'll save that. Now in this case, just notice, we're back to the original page, and in this case we have a different message that's come up, and this says delta compressed. Since we've been at this page before, in this case only 2% of the messaging was necessary in order to update the page. And if we go back to the content store, we can see that again it continues to grow, but the entries are now changing because they're getting smaller, because we're only sending delta files. So we're going to rename revision 2 to the original file name. And we'll save a copy. And again, you can continue to see that now delta compression is being used to save traffic between the client and the server. And now we'll ask for this file to be brought down. And we'll save a copy. Now in this case, you'll notice that it takes just a little bit longer for SmartSync to begin its process because the comparison between the files is being performed. However, the total amount of time to send the file will be much less than the original. All of these little chunks make it much easier to transit and to survive the transiting process between the originating server and the client. And we have a message here that says that the content was received using delta compression with a savings of 87%. so only 13% of the file actually transited across the wire. And you'll notice when we make the comparison that we've added 4 megabytes on top of the existing file. So we'll save that, save it to the same location, but we'll call this one Rev2. And then when we make the comparison in the content store, now we have a 21 megabyte file. We no longer need the original file, we've superseded it. And in the down box, we now have Rev2. And you can see 21 megabytes in comparison to 17, so we've added roughly 4 megabytes. And we now have that version in the content store. And to get that additional 4 megabytes, we only sent the 4 megabytes. And we're actually able to compress that in the process. So delta compression provided a savings of roughly 87%. So just to take this one step further, we'll go ahead and rename this file back to its original name. And again, over a very challenged network, my browsing process would look as if I had a very good connection, even if there was very little bandwidth or high latency or interrupts. And we continue to get delta compression benefits. And this one is yet another revision of the same document with even more content added. And we'll name that to its original name. And then we'll ask for a copy. And SmartSync at this point will bring down only the difference. And again, a comparison is being made, and then the file begins to send once the server has packaged up the resultant comparison file, and it sends down only that amount which is needed to reconstruct the file. If there's any interrupt in the process, SmartSync knows which portions of the broken down file need to be resent. And just to give you a sense of the file sizes, they range between 5 and 10 kilobytes, as low as 4 kilobytes. And again, this gives us the ability to survive a very challenged bandwidth. In this case, we received the file with delta compression of 81%, and I'll save the file using the file naming that we came up with before, and you'll see I've added quite a bit of content, which is the reason that you see an 81% savings. So this is revision 3, and we'll save that out. And now we'll go look at the down box. And here we have added yet another 4 megabyte size that our content store should correspondingly show that we replaced the prior file and now have a 25 megabyte file. So the content store has been growing in size, however it's proportional to the size of the amount of content sent across through that session. And you can purge this on a purge user basis, on a time basis, or on a size basis. And we can see that the file has grown. There are also logs that allow us to examine any of the errors that may have occurred. The log files are very easy to examine, though it's not normally a user function. So now for the last step, I'm going to bring down this AVI file. And if you're already familiar with SharePoint, you know that multimedia files like movies are not easily handled by SharePoint. So again, we'll ask for it to bring down a copy. And here it comes. This is a very large file. Again, we chose a large file as an example, so it's easy to understand the benefits of SmartSync. Although SmartSync works on a large range of files, as small as a few kilobytes in size, and as large as gigabytes. This clip is 34 megabytes in size, and it was sent using delta compression, in this case of 85%. And we'll save it to this location. And here again we have in our down box, there's the video clip. And in our content store, we can find a file of 35 megabytes. So there was enough content for us to make the comparison to the prior documents. And here we have the result.
Hey, everyone's eating tacos outside Bill's office. Don't you think that's some information I would like to know? I like tacos. You invited Eric? I thought Eric gave you the creeps. Oh. Yeah. Hey.
That concludes our demonstration of SmartSync using various file types. Please contact us if you have any questions. Thanks and have a great day.
Ironhawk Technologies, delivering decision-critical data.